welcome to Northfield. I'm Alana.
And I'm Henry.
And we are standing here at Bridge Square, also known as Mill Square, in 1876.
And we'd like to take you over to the Northfield Historical Society Museum and tell you a little bit about what happened on September 7th, 1876.
So come on with us to the museum. We are standing on Division Street, and in 1876, I would have been standing on a boardwalk. The road in front of me, completely made of dirt.
Right across that street during that era was the Wheeler Blackman Drug Store, where one of our key figures in the story, Henry Wheeler, was sat in front of his father's drug store. He was a medical student at the University of Michigan, and he was home for fall break that day.
J.S. Allen, another key figure, was the last customer in the bank that day. He had exited and was sitting on the corner with his friends by the Shriver Building staircase. He owned a hardware store next to A.R. Manning, and no one in the town knew what was going on at this point.
Also across the street from us right now was the Dampier House. The top two floors made up the Dampier House Hotel, which will become an important piece of the story for one of our figures, Henry Wheeler, later. So the James Younger gang rode into town in three separate groups. The first group consisted of Frank James, Bob Younger, and Charlie Pitts, and they were the group that was going to go into the bank. So they came up Division Street from the north side and sat on some crates waiting for their cue.
The second group was Bill Chadwell, Jim Younger, and Jesse James. They were milling around Mill Square in an attempt to guard the exit the outlaws would take.
And the final group was Cole Younger and Clell Miller, so they rounded the corner, came up Division Street from the south side, and their intention was to guard the street, and them rounding the corner was also the cue for the other three men to go into the bank.
Once Frank, Bob, and Charlie see Cole and Clell rounding the corner, it's their cue to go into the bank. As they head in, they leave the front door open that was already open to circulate some air on this unseasonably warm day.
But Clell Miller, seeing that the door had been left open, got off his horse, went over to the bank door, and shut it. Now this aroused a lot of suspicion among townspeople. Three men in white linen dusters had just gotten off their horses, sat down, then gone into the bank, and then another man in a white linen duster had just gone up to the bank door and shut it.
This aroused suspicion of Henry Wheeler across the street, but especially in J.S. Allen. He took matters into his own hands and went up to Clell to investigate. Clell Miller, seeing this, pulls out his revolver and pushes J.S. Allen back. J.S. Allen immediately knows what's going on, and he shouts the immortal words, "Get your guns, boys, they're robbing the bank!" And across the street,
Henry Wheeler yells,
"Robbery! Robbery!"
And the third and final group consisted of Cole Younger and Clell Miller, and their intention was to guard the street, and they were also the cue for the other three men to go into the bank when they rounded the corner from the south side. So by this point, the outlaws are making their way out of the bank. Bob is the first out, and he runs north down Division Street.
A.R. Manning sees this and takes an initial shot off, but misses.
Bob then ducks behind this staircase here, and he and Manning get into a little cat and mouse duel, and neither can seem to get the upper hand on the other.
Who is watching all of this? Henry Wheeler from the Dampier House Hotel window. He decides to take a shot off on Bob and hits,
shattering Bob's elbow. Bob swiftly switches his revolver to the other hand and continues to duel Manning.
A.R. Manning, seeing this switch, decides to get a jump on him by going around from the backside.
So by this point, Cole notices that everybody is out of the bank and on the street, and so he gathers everyone together. They start riding their horses south down Division Street, but Bob, whose horse had earlier been killed, runs after them yelling, "Don't leave me here, boys." Cole comes back for him, Bob gets on Cole's horse, and 6 men ride south on Division Street on 5 horses and make their way out of town. So when the dust settled, Northfield was left with 2 dead outlaws, Bill Chadwell and Clell Miller, as well as Bob Younger's horse. Additionally, in the crossfire, 1 innocent bystander was killed, a Swedish immigrant named Nick Gustafsson. He was hit in the head and would die in a hospital 4 days later.
Now let's head into the actual bank where these events took place behind closed doors.
Wait, are we saying something? We are now standing on the actual floor of the Northfield First National Bank where the raid took place in 1876. Many of the items you see around you are the actual ones that were here on the day of the raid. This ledger is the same one that was here, with J.S. Allen being the last entry. The table back here is the same table that was there that day, and it will go on to be a part of our story later on. The clock is also the same clock that was here that day, and it's set to the approximate time that the raid started, 2 p.m. This vault is also the same vault that was here that day, which held the $15,000 that the outlaws were attempting to steal. equal to about $250,000 today. In fact, nearly every item that you see in here is the exact same item that was in here the day of the raid, or one from the time period, with the exception of the teller's cage, which is an exact replica.
There were 3 workers in the bank that day. The first was Alonzo Bunker, the teller. Then there was Frank Wilcox, the clerk, and over here was the acting cashier, Joseph Lee Haywood. There were also 3 outlaws that went to the bank that day: Frank James, Charlie Pitts, and Bob Younger. As soon as they walked in the door, they jumped over the teller's cage, and the first one who was assigned with the job was Bob Younger. He was in charge of keeping Bunker and Wilcox at bay while searching for any cash on hand.
Now, Frank James's job was to determine who was the cashier, because the cashier was the only person in the bank who would have access to the safe. Seeing that Haywood was the oldest, Frank went over to Haywood and asked if he was the cashier and demanded that he would open the safe. Haywood, at this point, risks his life for the first time of 4 in our story by denying that he is the cashier. So Frank walks over to Bunker and Wilcox and asks if they're the cashier. Both of them deny it.
A frustrated Charlie Pitts takes matters into his own hands and opens the vault and starts to access it himself.
At this point, Haywood will risk his life for the second time by attempting to shut Charlie Pitts in the vault.
However, Charlie Pitts manages to escape the vault and is angry at this point, takes his revolver, and demands that Haywood open the safe.
Haywood now risks his life for the 3rd time, saying that the safe is on a time lock and he cannot open it. And then in an attempt to intimidate the outlaws, as well as alert the townspeople as to the danger inside the bank, Haywood yells, "Murder! Murder!"
In an attempt to silence him, Charlie takes the butt of his revolver and hits Haywood over the head with it. He then takes unconscious Haywood and demands to everyone in the bank that he is going to slit his throat. He runs his blade across his throat, but doesn't actually make a cut. He is only trying to intimidate Bunker and Wilcox into cooperating with the heist. However, he realizes at this point, probably, that this is the only person who can open the safe. At this point, it's important to speculate why Haywood would have risked his life 4 times. The first likely reason is that money during this time period was not insured, and if it was lost for good.
And the $15,000 in the safe that day was not the money of big businesses or corporations. It was the hard-earned money of the people of Northfield, many of whom Haywood knew personally. That money represented the hopes and dreams and future of the town of Northfield. And the second reason is that Haywood knew something that the outlaws didn't, something that would have changed the entire course of the raid had they known it. Haywood knew that the safe that lay behind the doors of the vault had been unlocked the entire time.
At this point, Cole has ridden up twice, yelling at the gang to get out of there. They're hearing gunshots, things are heating up, and Charlie's feeling the heat. He drags semi-conscious Haywood over here, trying to get him to wake up, shaking him. It's not really working. He grabs his revolver and fires a shot right next to his ear in an attempt to wake him up. It goes into the wall and has little effect on Haywood.
But the shot does have an unintended consequence, making Bob Younger turn around, turning his back on Bunker and Wilcox to see who shot who. Bunker sees his chance and makes a break for it out the back door. Charlie Pitts is the only one who sees him do this, follows him out the back door into the alley, and takes 2 shots. The first one misses, but the second does connect and hit Bunker in the shoulder. However, Bunker was able to run all the way to a local doctor's office where he would be treated for his wounds and live.
As Charlie re-enters, Cole rides up for the 3rd time, yelling at the outlaws, "Get out of there, boys. They're shooting us to pieces." For the outlaws, the game is up.
So at this point, Bob Younger hops over the teller's cage, carrying a burlap bag that held all the money that the outlaws were able to take from the First National Bank that day, $26.70. Now, although Bob and Frank searched nearly every one of these drawers, they were unable to find the one that held the cashier's till, which was a sum of about $3,000 that day. So Bob leaps over the teller's cage, and Charlie is quick to follow him out.
Frank James is the last outlaw in the bank that day. Before he jumps over the teller's cage and joins the others, he looks around and sees this.
He sees Haywood leaning on this very table, struggling to stand up, using this table for support.
Frank James goes over to this defenseless man, the only man that has stood up to this gang in 10-year history of robbing banks and trains. He puts the revolver at his head and fires in cold blood.
Haywood falls back to the ground and is dead immediately. Frank James then coldly jumps over the teller's cage and exits the bank. So from start to finish, the Northfield bank raid only took approximately 7 minutes. And in the aftermath, the townspeople of Northfield were dismayed to come in and see Joseph Lee Haywood lying dead on the ground of the bank. And for many years, people would ask, why Haywood would have risked his life to protect the money in the safe. But what it really wasn't just protecting the money in the safe. He was protecting the hopes and dreams and the future of this town.
He not only saved our town's potential, but many towns, because the James Younger Gang never went to rob another bank or train ever again. And a lot of people come to the museum trying to figure out the story of Jesse James, but what we think is so much more important is the story of Joseph Lee Haywood, a man who had courage and bravery, a man who was so in love with this town that he was willing to die for it. Thanks for coming to the Northfield Historical Society today.
We hope you've enjoyed your visit, and we hope this visit has allowed you to gain a greater appreciation for the history of Northfield, the town that defeated the James Younger Gang.